board's positions are reflected appropriately in the final standards, and that we will get to September with high confidence that we're going to get to conclusion in a efficient manner. The QM1 task force has brought back significant issues for discussion that we had left open or the board had discussed in April. 220, in collaboration with the ISQM1 task force, the 220 task force has presented a revised resources section. The QM2 section task force is bringing issues related to the proposed revision to the IAASB code addressing the objectivity of engagement quality reviews. And of course, we have the important discussion of effective dates of these standards. So thank you to all who were involved in preparing the meeting papers. I thought they were excellently prepared. And really, again, asking everyone, which I know you will do, is to think constructively on how we could move all of these projects forward. I'll pause for a moment and ask Billy, James, or Fiona whether they have anything to add before I have a couple more comments to make.
Nothing further, Tom, at this stage.
Nope, nothing. Thank you. Very complete, Tom. Thank you.
Fiona, anything to add?
Nothing from my perspective either. Thank you.
Just in case you were worried about missing your opportunity to be a YouTube star, never fear. Armand has fixed it. We are live on YouTube right now. So I'm very excited about that possibility. My daughter's been asking for her own YouTube channel for quite some time, but she'll have to live with the knowledge that I have one, at least with my work. So great. So just another thing, and outreach, and we'll leave a lot of the outreach discussions to the COVID-19 because a lot has been done. There's been no sign that we're letting up on our outreach. To some extent, the COVID crisis has allowed us to even intensify our outreach because we don't need to jump on planes to do it. And then this is clearly a learning that we have as a result of the crisis. From crisis comes innovation. And, I'll talk a little bit about that in context of COVID. One of the areas of intensive outreach has been with IAASB, and IAASB on their PI project. So that has been great. And we had a discussion, obviously, with our national standard setters and with the ethics national standard setters on that topic. And so we will continue our intensive outreach with IAASB as well. I do encourage you, we keep track of all of the IAASB specific outreach for the record and note it and report upon it and make it part of our regular reports to the PIOB. So I encourage you to send that in to the team if you are doing outreach related to our work. And the other thing I would just say is that draft minutes for the March 2020 meetings, if you have comments, please make sure that you've submitted any comments. We'll be updating them and by Wednesday posted a version, which we hope to approve on Friday, June 19th. Finally, for those observing, for those on the board, for those who want to amplify our message, obviously we'll be posting updates on our Twitter feed. Very excited. We're up to 6,200 Twitter followers. Let's get that up to 7,000 in the not so distant future. And LinkedIn, we're fully on board, and within this quarter, we were up to 672 followers. We'll do some updates on LinkedIn as well. So with that, I think we're ready for the meeting's agenda. Today we have our COVID-19 response and technology. But I'll pause. Does anyone have any comments on my opening remarks or the agenda for this week? I also invite the our official observers to comment if they would like to say something up front.
Hi, it's great to see everybody. It's been a long time for me. Thank you, and I'm just glad to be here.
We're really glad to have you here, Karen. And I should say that the PIOB and we are working closely in tandem on our COVID response and all the things related to public interest. And I really appreciate the partnership at this time and over my first year in this role. Okay, so COVID-19 pandemic, Billy and I are going to take this on. And let me tell you a little bit about the context of why we have this on the agenda. We decided to put this on this agenda, I think, probably even while the March meeting was still, March or April meeting was ongoing. And I thought that it was really important for the board as a whole, even though we were doing some actions over time, to look, to examine what we've done, examine the landscape, and as a collective body, pause and reflect to see, are we doing the right things? Do we need to adapt further? Do we need to think about our effective dates and our comment periods? And this is a discussion that really needed to be on the public record as well. And so that is the purpose of the discussion. And if anything is like, we either want to have affirmation of the current work plan and timelines, or have some discussion about it and adapt further. Because I think one of the things that we agreed at the last meeting was the absolute requirement to be flexible as we respond to events. And I think that's at the heart of it. The other thing I wanted to say is, I'm so pleased that we have a strategy in place going into this period, and that we adopted a strategy that wasn't so focused on the detail, but was clear enough that would provide some guidance going forward, and served as a bit of a North Star for us to figure out how to respond to different challenges. I think that's what it's been done, what is done. And I'm always reminded of the great strategist Mike Tyson's remark about everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And clearly the COVID-19 pandemic has been a punch in the face to pretty much the whole world, and we're not different. But I think our strategy is held up. If you think about what our strategy did, it said, get the right technical programs and pivot to them for the public interest purpose on your work plan. 2 was to be agile and innovative in your approach to standard setting. And 3 is intensify your engagement with stakeholders. I think all of those apply. And if you flip the slide here, you'll see that that's translated into a 3-pronged approach for us. Arma, thank you. Which I call assess, adapt, and coordinate. And I think that's exactly what we've done. We've tried to take a very proactive approach in terms of assisting our stakeholders to apply our standards faithfully. And this has been resulted in staff alerts, 7 of which, 4 of which are, I think, out, 3 are imminent, particularly 2 of them are imminent. And we'll get some focus on them a little bit more closely. Also, it's revealing, I think the crisis is the ultimate stress test of our standards. In our discussions, our sense is that the principle-based standards are holding up quite well, and that they're proven to be robust and provided ample guidance to our stakeholders in terms of applying and understanding information from audit and assurance reports. However, it is revealing some areas where we could improve our standards, and one of them relates to like interim reporting, where I think that will jump up our issues to address in the future. Other areas that are always on the top of people's mind is like going concern, fraud, how technology is influencing audit evidence. All those points are on our agenda, and just gives us a sense of urgency. On the adapt side, you know, the first thing we did, and maybe more so than anything, the work that we did well in advance of the crisis, to move to video conferencing. Thank God we had this in place to be ready for this crisis and be able to move seamlessly. So we're obviously all in a virtual setting. We're taking advantage of it. We would love to be in a position where we could do face-to-faces at some point in the near future, but I think we're managing through this virtual setting quite well. And also the ability to have amongst the staff and management, a full Office 365 cloud-based environment has helped too, as we utilize the tools that are there, including SharePoint in Teams. And then the other thing is we've adapted our work plan and consultations, even the way we're conducting this meeting, pushing out to September, the QM standards, extending the timeline on 600. All of those are adaptations, and we're going to continue to ask whether we need to adapt at this meeting. And then thirdly, the coordination front. One of the things that I noticed is that everyone wants to be helpful in this crisis, and rightfully so, but we were worried a little bit that if each part of the ecosystem does their own thing without talking, that there's a risk of confusing the landscape with too much information that was inconsistent. So a few of the things we've been doing with is national standard setters. We've been meeting almost with those involved with this board on a 3-weekly basis. We had our national standard setter meeting in early May. And there have been a number of useful items that have followed from all those discussions. We've been meeting with IAASB's Committee 1 and IFER and different regulatory authorities from time to time. We've been meeting on regular basis with the GPPC and IFAC and other PAOs. We've been participating in webinars. So there is no shortage of outreach in this context. And of course, we will share what we've done with the board. And I think we have the list that we shared with the planning committee last week. I don't think we've shared that with the full board yet, Bev, right? Right, we'll do that in the near future. So a lot's happening on this front. Flip the side. Finally, as you can see, this is our timeline of staff alerts. And I think when we think about our work, we've front-loaded our response to deal with staff alerts, allocated lots of resource to it, maybe just allocated Bev and Angela's sleeping time to the drafted of staff alert. A huge congratulations to the staff team for getting this out in record time. The new ones that are expected before end of June are really close to being done, and partly are bottlenecked by some of us who have to review them still. But I think the team deserves huge congratulations for what they've done. They've got a great response from our standard setting partners, many of them which have been translated to native languages. So congratulations. We don't anticipate adding many more to this list. It doesn't mean that we're not receptive to doing more, but it's our sense that this is the near complete list of where guidance is needed right now. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Billy, but it's a good point of the discussion to pause for a moment to get any general reactions to where we are, and general sense of comfort, unease, things that we could be doing better on our general COVID response. Any comments? Chun-Li.
Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me okay? And
yeah.
So thank you for introductory comments. So first of all, I want to just thank you and congratulate you and Willie for your leadership during this time. I've mentioned before how much I appreciate the agility and flexibility demonstrated by the board, particularly in how we progress the various projects, the timing of approval, timing of consultation deadlines, and so on. And my views remain the same. I continue to refer to IAASB as a good example in terms of how an organization respond to the crisis, respond to the needs of stakeholders. Tom, I have a few feedback that I've received in relation to the staff alerts. Is it an appropriate time to share them now?
I believe so. Yeah, please do.
Okay. So even though the agenda for the board meeting this week, it looks like lighter. We know that the staff, to your point earlier, Tom, has been working very hard behind the scene, progressing the different projects. So the different staff alerts that have been issued so far and the timing of their issue have therefore been very much appreciated based on the outreach we've done with some practitioners. I have some specific feedback that I've received, and I'll just mention 4 points very quickly, if I may. First of all, in terms of the structure and the language used, we've heard positive feedback, and some were wondering whether such simpler, more relaxed, more direct language can be more actively used in our standard setting. And I guess it goes a little bit to the LCE, one of the work stream on simplifying the language, etc. Although interestingly, we've also heard, although to a lesser extent, some feedback from non-native speakers, particularly, that the staff alerts still remain quite lengthy and still too cautious, the language is still rigid. So I guess there's always room for us to further simplify and further improve. So that's on the structure and the language. Second point is on visibility of what's to come. And in the communique from Willie in mid-April, I think he highlighted the staff alerts that were at that time work in progress. And that's really helpful. But there may be some users who, for some reason, may have missed Willie's note. So in today's environment where we know everything is filled with uncertainties, any form of certainty, any attempt to provide further clarity, even for simple things like this, these are the staff alerts that are coming your way, watch out for them. It will be very gratefully received by our users. So there's a feedback there. And for now, we may want to consider adding a little box to the COVID-19 page and mention the 3 new pieces that we have now on the slide that we are expecting to provide before the end of June. So just in terms of visibility of what's to come, so people know that these are coming. The third point is, like I think many of the colleagues around the table, I'm sure, we get wish lists in terms of what practitioners hope IAASB can provide on future staff alerts. Tom, I got your point about how we think it's a near complete list, and I agree this is a very comprehensive list. But there's some, I guess, topics that I still hear on the wish list. One of them is on materiality, for example. They think, I think it's safe to assume that majority of business have suffered a severe hit to their profitability as a result of the pandemic. And there's always a question around the appropriate materiality to use in the audit, whether you can normalize the profit before tax. Do you isolate the impact from the pandemic? Can you even do that? How do you do that? And so on. Or do you use average of past results? Is that appropriate? And one other practitioner suggested that we can consider highlighting how IAASB 3400 might be more actively used to provide moderate assurance in today's environment when prospective financial information is increasingly demanded. So I guess the broader point is, are we really stopping at these next 3, or do we have plans to continue monitoring practice and potentially providing more support in this space? And my last comment, and to end on the very positive note, we also received feedback, and I might add, the feedback was voluntarily given, it wasn't solicited, on how helpful the 540 illustrative examples have been. So congratulations to Rich and to the team. I think that's also a very positive reinforcement of the board's new direction to provide more implementation support so that our standards can be applied in a globally consistent and robust manner. So Tom, that will be my comments on the staff alert. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Isabel.
Yes, hello everybody. On this topic, I first want to congratulate the staff for having prepared all these documents and working on the ones that are to come. It was very well perceived by my environment. And it proves that as a board, we are able to do some kind of rapid response. And at the time where we are thinking on how best we can serve the expectation in the public interest, the fact that we can very quickly add new publications to our lists and play a role, to me it's very important, and it was very well perceived. Like Chun-Wei, as an IAASB member, I had a lot of questions from people asking what is next to come. They had missed that communication on what were the expected next staff alert. And among the topics, the one that has the highest level of interest is what is called on this slide interim reporting. With my own words, I would have called it review of interim financial statements, but I don't know if it's the same. Because when we say interim reporting, do we only mean report? So is it only the communication part? Or will we deal also with the work effort? Because currently, at least at the NSS level, there's a lot of debate on the work effort in a review of interim financial statements, and also, of course, how to best convey the result of the work in the report. But currently, really, the area of focus is review of interim financial statements. So we are all really looking forward to that one. And the sooner the better, because a lot of companies are preparing interim financial statements as of the end of June. And all national standard setters and firms are starting to develop some guidance. So there's a kind of urgency on that topic if we want to drive the direction. Because I can hear, at least in Europe, that some countries may have different position on some extent of work effort for a review. And it would be very interesting to have the position of IAASB staff on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Rich?
Thanks, Tom. So like others, I'd like to start and just say thanks for your and Willie's leadership on this area. I think these have been well received. I've got people in the profession, auditors who just like to see this and say that something's coming out. I think it's great to build up the profile of the IAASB, of being able to get something out. We know that's always an issue for us. So like I said, I think the staff and leadership should be commended for this. As I said, the staff alerts themselves have been well received. I thought they were written very well. And the part that I thought was good, both myself, but also others have pointed out, was that all we're doing here is pointing out what we know is what the standards say, and not trying to say, put in interpretations or other aspects in there. And I think that's good. Even if something's slipped in, that would be detrimental, because people then would be, not sure which one they're following. So I think we've been really good at the language. I think we should continue to really focus that it is what is in the standards and not an interpretation. But like I said, we've done that. Thanks, Chun-Wei, for your comment on examples. It's one of the things that it clearly took us a long time to get out, and I'm glad they were finally out. Banking will be next. And maybe the one negative, it's not necessarily even on the COVID, Tom, but it's sort of brought out because of the COVID. When people went in to look at the COVID, they were able to find them easily because they're the last topic we sent out. And so there's a link, go to the page, you get to see them, nice and easy. But I then had people going, since I was in the site, how else do I move around? And they were having a hard time finding our projects and the detailed guidance. And I just wonder if there's something that we can do to sort of revamp our website to be more user friendly. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thank you, Rich. We'll address address that. I note that you complimenting Billy and me on our leadership, but again, I want to just emphasize that Bev really has been leading the project in our response on the staff alerts and other matters related to COVID too. So I just thank you for the recognition, but also I want to recognize Bev's efforts too, again, on this regard. So thank you, Bev, and thank you, Rich, for raising those points and others. We're just collecting them and then we'll respond. Roger?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Look, from me, as regard COVID-19, it's only praise. So congratulations on the leadership. We are showing IAASB as leaders in this current crisis. And we've shown how flexible we can be. So congratulations on the leadership that the IAASB has shown, plus the leadership and the staff. So I think that's a great tribute in this current time. It's been important for the IAASB to show leadership from all the people who could possibly interpret our standards, such as the national standard setters who have been under pressure to get this done. So again, the leadership shown by the IAASB has really helped to drive the consistency of the interpretations across it. Coordination. I've got 3 C's here, Tom, so I'm following your lead on these areas. Consistency, the coordination. I think, again, the meetings that we've had with national standard setters and others who are preparing it has shown a real leadership and coordination role, and the clarity of what's being done. And again, the emphasis being that standards are standing up well. The message coming through is very clear. The standards are standing up well. And there's some interpretations of what you do in this current area, but the standards are standing up well. So full of praise for the board and for Bev in this particular area and in the leadership shown. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Sue?
Hi, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for that. And also very much the feedback that I've had through the outreach has been about the appreciation for the staff alerts in particular. So thanks and congratulations to people there. Noting the timelines, there were a couple of comments about it would have been ideal to have got things earlier, but on the other hand, people have said they've valued the comprehensive nature of the alerts that have come out. So I think I think that balance is working well, and actually some very positive responses around not just the standards content of the alerts, but actually that they did include material to help operationalize the standards. So that I think in particular was very, very valued, rather than just repeating the exact words in the standards. In relation to future topics, agree, nothing particularly that is jumping out on the list, but I would reiterate the comments that others have made about the interims, because that is something that is really exercising people quite extensively. But maybe as we look into the longer period, if we are coming to a period of economic downturn, then matters around whether it's operationalizing the interactions with businesses that are in trouble, skepticism, and actually some of our firms have had discussions around the materiality piece that Chun-Wei mentioned. One area that we haven't touched on in relation to the board operation is that I think, and this may not be the right time, but I think I would love to see a detailed plan as to how we're going to get to a position of approving the quality management standards in September. It's great that we've moved the timeline, but I would hate to think that what we've done is simply move some of the detailed drafting activities into a later period. We are in a position of having 3 months to be able to work on some of this, and I think it'd be great to be able to have a detailed plan as to how we're going to move things, turn the drafting such that we set ourselves up for success in September. And maybe a little bit of self-interest in that I'm part of a working group where we cover pretty much all the time zones, and so the times to be able to work and turn things and be able to speak with board members and so on is very restricted. So if we're able to think about that kind of detailed activity, how we get take advantage of the time we've got to move those projects on would be great. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. Len?
Thank you, Tom. Just to echo some of the positive feedback from the outreach I've done, especially on the work of the staff. But just a couple points that to share from the outreach is one is ISA 600. There's a section in ISA 600 talk about access to information and people. So since the issuance of the exposure draft because of COVID-19. Some feedback is really focusing on in 600 you have this access issue, and we did have some language about outbreak and disease in that. So whether something can be done in terms of during the comment period, if we probably receive a lot of comments and input based on what's happening, whether IAASB will consider building some around that. I'm not sure whether 600 is the right place to deal with it, but there's a provision in there talk about enable to access to all the evidence, information, and people in 600. So that I thought that was coming through right after we issued the ED, and that also came up in the IASB call we had between the ISA 600 group and IASB earlier. And the other one related was all the evidence in the time of COVID-19. How do you get all the evidence, and how do you verify all the evidence? So those are the two areas I've heard since the staff issuance of the alert. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you, Len. Anyone else want to comment on the way we responded in general? We'll get to timelines next, which is a critical discussion of the board, but absent discussion about timelines and our current work plan. Any other thoughts? Okay, let me respond to some of the things that I heard, and then I'll invite Billy and Bev also to jump in as well. Chun-Wei, on your comments related to length and staff alerts and language, I think this is one of our issues. I think the staff alerts have been in more direct language, but it's a constant push. I think Bev's done a really good job to try to be direct, but we are running a balance on the length. Is that you heard it on this call? Some of the people liked the real detail, and so we're going back and forth about getting the right balance on how much people need. A lot of people have encouraged us to be quite comprehensive on it, but yes, we will always focus on being as sharp as we can be. But I think we're doing our best right now. Bev's done a really good job in trying to get the right balance there. I'll let this team talk about topics that we heard that are potentials, materiality 3400, matters around professional skepticism, and so obviously we're taking it. We're aware of these things, and then we just have to consider about what rises to the level of requiring a staff alert in light of all of our other topics, and whether there are other national standard setters who possibly doing that work that we could bring light to. Complexity, Rich, the complexity of the website. That's funny you say that. We talked about that topic last week. Our website needs to be overhauled. There's no doubt about that. Just like we're moving to an electronic version of our handbook by next year that has searchability associated. We need to have searchability and improved navigation of our website. So we talked with the comms team last week on that topic. Hopefully we'll be progressing it in the not so distant future. I've heard Sue's point about our plan for QM. Obviously we have a mock draft agenda for the September board meeting already, but my understanding is you would like a little bit of a layout on from here to September as well. We'll think about that. And in general, though, it gives me quite a bit of comfort though, and that we have responded directionally appropriately, obviously with the idea that we could always use constructive feedback. Vili and Bev, anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Tom. Maybe just a few comments in addition to that. I think the point that was made around posting something on our webpage about upcoming staff alerts, I think that's a good idea. We can certainly add that. I'll leave the website to Bev. I think Bev has got a little bit of more detail there. I hear the comments that came out around some of the issues coming up regarding audit evidence. We have certainly been monitoring the topics around audit evidence. What we've seen is a lot of the aspects around audit evidence are very specific to auditing certain items, like, for example, inventory and so on. So we've been trying to keep a balance there. We've seen that a lot of others, like professional accountancy organizations and NSS, have issued specific audit evidence guidance. So at the moment, what we thought we will do is we will make sure that the learnings from this we will take into our audit evidence project. And then maybe just to Sue's comment around the planning for September, that is very much in our minds. We've gone through some iterations in terms of a possible agenda for September. You know that it's been announced formally that the September meeting will be virtual, and we will spread it out over 7 days. A part of that reason is exactly some of the points that Sue mentioned in terms of creating enough space so documents can be turned in a virtual environment and that we have enough time to discuss. But obviously, I get that Sue's comment also relates to the lead up to them. So we will certainly look at that, but we will hopefully be in a position within the next week or two to actually circulate a draft agenda to the board for the September meeting. I think I'm just going to hand over to Bev as well to maybe talk about the website and anything else she wants to add.
Thanks, Vili and Tom. So on the website, we have actually met with IFAC. There are some quick fixes that they can do to sort of make it look a little bit nicer. It's a little bit sort of dull and it's quite hard to find things. Some of the navigation pieces we understand is very difficult to find things. It's not very obvious when you go into the landing page. Some of it is structural, so we will need to work with them about how we get that fixed. But we are very aware that there are issues in the website and we are looking at them. And we'll work with them over the next couple of weeks to try and make it easier to navigate through the website. On the digitization of the handbook, I will talk about that tomorrow when we talk about the LCEs. We have been moving in that area, so I'll sort of give you a rundown of where we are. Just a couple of things, just to some comments. On the interim reporting, it's probably not quite correct on that slide. It's actually ISRA 2410. It does cover the work effort and the reporting. We do recognize that there are inconsistencies between the interim standard and the final standard. So we're doing some additional work in addition to the staff alerts, which we will put onto the IFAC website because it's probably not just auditing. There's other pieces that come into there, particularly around the accounting. So there will be lots of guidance going up with regard to interim reporting. We do recognize that there are many, many issues in that. And we have done extensive outreach to try and make sure that we are capturing all of the issues in relation to the interim financial statements. And then just lastly, on the language that we use within the staff alerts, we have to be very careful not to be seen to be interpreting the standards in any way. I think Rich made the comment that it would cause issues if we had something in there that is additional to what is in the standards. We've tried to provide examples to sort of add color, but we can't use the sort of looser language that perhaps we would like to use. For that reason is that we can't add anything to the existing standards or seem to be creating new requirements or new work for auditors. So I think we are trying very carefully to keep to the language that is within the standards at the moment. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Bev. That's very helpful. And also, one of the responses to the crisis may be is as we start thinking about building our framework of activities and what type of other tools we need in the standard setting process, this highlights, well, do we need a quick fix type approach to standard setting, interpreted? These are all on the radar screen going forward. Obviously not for discussion today, but the crisis is highlighting whether we have a position on that, and the framework of activities discussion provides us a venue for that discussion going forward. So I'm pleased about that. Okay, I think we should turn to timetables. Can you flip the slide? I'm going to just lead us off, and then I'll turn it to Billy, because some of this you already know. Obviously, as I said, I think the air quotes around lighter is meant to be air quotes. I don't believe that the board meeting is any lighter. Maybe from a reading perspective, it was lighter, and that was intentional. But the topics have significant weight to them, and we've been adaptive in terms of timetables of our projects and managing your load. One of the things that we heard at the outset of the crisis was that we couldn't continue at the pace by which we were going in March and April, that the constant iterations was just not sustainable for a volunteer board, but also for a staff that was dispersed. So I think we've done a decent job in balancing that out. ISO 600, as you know, we did extend the work, the exposure draft period from August, that was originally intention, to October. We will discuss that a little bit shortly. We have two standards that are completed but not required for implementation yet: 315 and ISRS 4000, right? 3400, I think, but AUP, I get all the numbers mixed up from time to time, but AUP is out there, and we need to just consider whether we're comfortable with those effective dates. And we revised with some subtlety our timelines for some projects. So Billy, I think this is a good point for you to say, like, how is that playing out, and set it up the discussion for the board about any decisions or guidance that needs to be made. And really, when we think about that, is the first thing needs to be, in my mind, how do we ensure that we're getting the necessary input to make high quality decisions to produce high quality standards? So that's the first criteria. And secondly, reflecting on our stakeholders who have to absorb the standards, both from a practitioner standpoint, but also from a user standpoint, either whether they're investors or other user financial and other reported information, or those charged with governance. Are they able to adapt to adopt in such a way that they could adopt the standards in a high quality fashion, that it's producing the intended outcome? So those are the two things that I think about in terms of criteria for president. And then finally, I guess the only other things is this is a question of timeliness. It's always a balance, but what's the opportunity cost of delay and its impact in terms of the public interest? And that has to permeate everything we do. So Billy, I turn it to you.
Thank you, Tom. And maybe just to clarify, we did not write the new standard in the interim, so there's no ISRS 400. It's ISRS 4400. And I must say, this is the first time I saw that net in the slides, and we've been working with them for a few days. But thank you very much, Tom. I think that was a good introduction. And I think what that shows is that what we've discovered, when we went into lockdown in March, we had to make very quick decisions in a very short period of time to convert that meeting to a virtual meeting. And we actually did a tremendous job. This board did a tremendous job to make sure that we passed ED 600 and put it out on exposure. We obviously also learned a few lessons from that March week, as well as the additional 3 calls that we had afterwards. And that was all input that factored into our consideration of the work plan. And as we went through and started to look at the work plan, a lot of other factors that Tom has alluded to popped up. And this it was a difficult puzzle to fit. And I can promise you, we went through quite a number of iterations. So Armand, if you can turn the slide. So on the next slide, the next few slides is sort of just a schematic presentation of the changes that we've made. These are all reflected in the detailed work plan that was formally updated and published on May 18th, and that is available on our website. You will remember the strategy and the work plan was approved in December last year. The PIOB's approval came through in March, and we published the strategy and work plan as it was approved. We thought that would be the least confusing to anyone to just publish it first as it was approved, was on April 15. And then subsequent to that, we made changes to the detailed work plan that was published on May 18. Apart from the factors that I've already referred to, the work plan, the revised work plan also benefited from the input from the planning committee. And we obviously also consulted with the PIOB before we made those changes. This is just a different way of setting it out. And really what you should be looking out for here is anything that is in green has actually not changed. Anything in orange was how it was, and then in yellow is how we've changed it. So you can imagine that the biggest shift that caused knock-on effects for other projects is the fact that we've decided to move the approval of the QM standards out to September. I'll just quickly run through and point out some of the most important points in these slides. You will see that, broadly speaking, what we've done is we started by bucketing the projects into two big buckets. You will see there's a heading that starts there on the slide with priority projects, and then 2 slides on it says other projects. Now, please, I don't want that to be misinterpreted. That priority simply means, for purposes of the exercise we did, we had to bucket and say which are the projects that need most, that we need to accommodate first in terms of any adjustments we make. It's not to say that the one bucket of projects is not important and the other is more important. This was just in terms of that exercise we were doing at that point in time, in terms of what to accommodate first. So the COVID-19 work stream came in. We've already spoken about that. The other big changes then obviously around ED 600, which the ED was approved. That is why it is shown in green. We extended the comment period from the normal 120 days, and it works out to be 158 days comment period. But what we need to reflect on is the implication of that change from 120 to 158 days. Because if you think about it, that takes in excess of 5 weeks out of the time that the task force would have been able to spend on looking at the comments. So that means it's 5+ weeks. That's where there's less time to look at the comments. The posting week in Q4 is November 20, which means if the comment period closes on October 2nd, to posting week is about 7 weeks. Now, if you think on a relatively big project, which this is, you're going to need about 4 to 5 weeks just to do the comment analysis. So you can imagine that there's very little, well, they will certainly come back in December with feedback on the analysis, high-level themes that have been identified, maybe 1 or 2 key issues that the task force have already given some thought to, but there will certainly be very limited drafting at the December meeting, which then means after that, you probably need March, June, September for an approval, if you can sort of draw the analogy to what we saw happened on the 315 project as well. And that's why you will see the targeted approval date is indicated as Q3 for 2021. Normally, PIOB approval follows one quarter after, and then in the explanatory memorandum, the implementation period has been indicated as at least a period of 18 months. So we've just factually indicated it here that 18 months will then bring you to June 2023, but that would be very unlikely as an effective date because of our general preference to use December as an effective date. But that is what is indicated there. On the QM standards, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. So if you'll allow me, I'll just go through the entire slides presentation, and then we can pause for questions. On the QM ones, it is reflected there. You all know that we've got a a bigger discussion around the effective date on Friday, but you will see that if you've already looked at the papers for Friday, the December 2022 has come out as a likely effective date, and that's simply what is reflected here, but we still need to have that discussion. Then on the next slide, we've got the conforming amendments. Now you will see there are two lines for the conforming amendments. The one is the conforming amendments arising from the QM standards to the ISAs. Now that is part and parcel actually of the project of approval of the 3 QM standards. So the approval there would then also be aligned with the approval of the QM standards in Q3. And then we run as a separate project. That is always how it's been set up. There's a separate project that is run to do conforming amendments from the QM standards to the other IAASB standards, and you will see that one is indicated in green. So actually the timeline there stays exactly as it was originally, that we will bring those the issues and the draft of the project proposal to the September meeting, and then hopefully in December we can have an ED. We can put that out on exposure for around 90 days, and then you will see it flows through, that the approval can then take place in Q4 of 2021. And obviously then whatever the effective date of the QM standards are, that the date here will then be aligned with this effective date of the QM standards. Then audits of LCEs, you will see on this slide and on the next slide, we have, when you do this type of planning, you have to anticipate what could possibly happen. And you know, for the paper we're going to discuss tomorrow, there is the suggestion that we need to split the work into 2 work streams. So the one that's reflected here is the separate standard work stream. So this is obviously all still subject to board discussion and the outcome of the discussion tomorrow. But as you can see, what has in essence happened here is that we were always planning to bring recommendations to the June meeting, then a project proposal in Q3, and then after that, the work would obviously have continued. But since the QM standards are really now going to occupy the September agenda, the group will not be able to come back in September. And that's why you will see that the proposals in the agenda item 4 for tomorrow have been set up in the way they have, to allow the working group then to continue in the 6 months, because they will only be able to come back in December. And then in December, there would be a project proposal, but we also hope then, based on the direction the board gives, that the working group can actually commence the work as well. And we can still capitalize on the 6-month period that lies ahead. The next 2 work streams are obviously very important for the IAAS. Yeah, you can still stay on that slide, Armand. The next 2 work streams are very important in the context of the IAASB's work. You will remember these are 2 work streams that we brought in based on outreach, and also based on the public interest issues raised by the PIOB. And that is the work, those are the 2 work streams on fraud and going concern. So although we had to make certain changes here, what we were able to do for the time being, and I mean, these things are always subject to change based on what happens, but at the moment we have been able to keep the targeted dates for project proposals as they were originally planned. So we still plan, although we've moved in terms of when certain things will come to the board, we are still targeting for fraud a project proposal in Q2 of 2021, and for going concern in September 2021. Then you can turn the slide, Armand. Then on the next one, here I must firstly make a correction. So this, what you see on the 3 slides that we're sharing with you in this presentation today, is actually an extract from a very, very long Word document. And there were many rows in that Word document where we planned certain scenarios. And regrettably on this one, the wrong row was deleted. So the EER one is not right. I'll tell you now what the right position on the EER project is. And what we will do after the session today is we will post an updated version of the slides presentations, not replace what's on the website. We will mark it as an updated version of the slides, so that if anybody that accesses the slides on the website will be aware. So the EER position is actually as follows. So in the left-hand cell, it should read comment period to July 13th, 120 days. So although in our scenario planning, we did look at a number of scenarios after consultation with Lynn, we did decide that we're not going to change the comment deadline on the EER project. So the comment deadline is still July 13th. In the table itself, then all that means that the first orange and yellow cells are correct, but both of them should say comment period. And then what is correct, because again, after I've had a number of calls with Lynn and we've reflected on this, we did realize that it is in all probability more realistic to think that the approval will probably push out to March, because again, what you will find from 13 July, when the comment period closes, until the posting date for the September meeting, you have 7 weeks. And again, about 4 of those weeks at least are going to be taken up just in terms of analyzing the comment letters, which then means there's about 3 weeks where the task force can meet, make certain finalize an issues paper, etc. So we thought then after that, it would probably be prudent to then say a December touch point and then approval in March. You know that this project is also affected by the fact that we've got external funding. So we have been in contact with the World Business Council and indicated to them the possible additional time that might be needed. They have responded in principle very positive towards that. And we obviously need to engage with them in a little bit more detail once we are a bit clearer after the comment period closes. Then the next line you will see is the other anticipated work stream that comes out of the LCE project. It's stated here as the ISA focused work stream. So again, because of the fact that we're not coming back, in September, the recommendations here. So we've decided in for this discussion for tomorrow to focus very much on the separate standard side of that project. And so where we were planning to bring recommendations to the June meeting for this work stream as well, those will now move out to December, taking into account that we won't have a touch point in September. That will then come in as recommendations in December. And that will then also allow, based on, again, subject to the discussion tomorrow, that those 2 work streams will then be able to move forward from December, because the proposal is always that the output of those 2 projects needs to be exposed at the same time. And then we can work probably towards the middle of next year for exposure drafts on those 2 projects. Audit evidence, also mainly affected by the fact that there won't be a touch point in September. So there's a substantial session on audit evidence this week on Thursday. As it turns out, Thursdays is not just a feedback and issues, it's also the recommendations. And then very similar to the LCE project, we're asking the board for clear direction so that the working group can continue to finalize the project proposal, but also start the work in the 6 months from now to December, seeing that we would not have a touch point in September. So you will see the same type of trend there that we saw in the separate standard work stream. Audit reporting implementation review, there's been no changes. So we still expect the feedback in December and then working towards recommendations based on the results of the post-implementation review in 2021. And then the only other one that we've changed, it's just that green line there should just be yellow to be consistent with the rest, is that because of obviously resources being redirected to our COVID-19 response, the implementation material for 315 has been moved out from Q3 to Q4 for completion purposes, for purposes of completing the implementation material. So I think I'm going to pause there. I'm first just going to look to Bev, in terms of anything you wish to add here, or maybe any, in the context of what we talked about earlier and these changes to the work plan, any learnings that we have, and then we can maybe hand back to Tom to get the board's comments.
Thanks. I think we've probably spoken mostly about a lot of the learnings, but I think we have learned a lot about the standards. I think the one thing that we have learned is that the standards, as Tom said earlier, our principle-based standards are holding up in the current environment. We are very aware of some issues in some areas. We do have ongoing projects for some of these things like going concern, fraud, audit evidence. We do continue to monitor whether there's something we can do in the interim by developing, say, a staff alert or Q&A that may help alleviate some of the the challenges and the issues that are being experienced. And very importantly, our auditor reporting standards, so the new suite of standards that we've issued, those are being tested, and they're being tested properly. And I think it will really help us as we do our auditor reporting post-implementation review, give us lots of information about what's working in those standards and what's not working in those standards, and whether there's anything more that we need to do within those standards. So as that review is sort of commencing, I think that's very helpful. But we do continue to monitor what's going on. We're going to continue to have our check-ins with the GPPC practitioners, with the NSS, just to see if anything is bubbling up. I think for now, the accounting issues seem to have settled down a little bit as the sort of December, March reporting season's over. But as we go into June, I suspect that things will start to come up again. And so we may need to reconsider whether we do need to do any more staff alerts. But we are on it, we are monitoring it, and we will continue to do so until this all sort of settles down. But at the same time, any issues or challenges that are coming up, they are feeding into a lot of the projects that we are commencing at this point in time. So with that, I'll hand back to Tom. Thanks.
Thank you, Billy and Bev. I'm trying to think about managing this in a relatively structured manner, because there are different levels of decisions that we need to make. At the end, if I precluded discussion on any topic that people want to discuss, then please interject and make sure that everything is aired. But the risk is that we have a free-for-all and we don't get to any conclusion on some of the key points. What I think we should do first was that we should discuss the appropriateness of our current comment periods on outstanding exposures or consultations, and really that's EER and 600. Remember, 600 we extended to October 2nd, and EER we've held the deadline as originally discussed, and I don't know if Lynn or Billy want to talk about that at all, or what some of our rationale has been and what we're hearing. But I really want to focus our discussion about, are we comfortable about where we stand on those consultation periods at this time? Billy, I see you, and Lynn.
Maybe I'll give Lynn first opportunity to go.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. We have considered very carefully whether we should extend the response date for EER, and we have had only 4 emails about, and all 4 of them, 3 of them just questioned whether we were leaving the response date at the 13th of July. And we went back and said, yes, at this stage, unless there's a compelling reason, and we didn't hear back from those 3 people. The 4th one was a country that was just going to be a week late, which we said we could deal with perfectly well. By leaving it in July, it gives us a better opportunity to have a fuller analysis in front of the September meeting, and more information in December, so that we have a better chance of approval in March. The final reason that I'd like to leave it in July is we have Pauline on board only till December. So it certainly is much more practical, and she comes back in July. It's more practical if we can leave the date at the 13th of July, so she is gainfully employed, because I think it's going to be difficult to renegotiate the contract past December. So that's where we're at in terms of of EER. And we had nearly 300 people on the webinar, and I would say we're getting a sense of people's comments, but it isn't, and quite a lot of support. Thanks, Tom.
Lily, anything to add?
No, that was an excellent summary by Lynn. Nothing to add.
Thank you, Lynn. So let's talk about ER first. And as you said, if you're comfortable with Lynn's position, no need to have to interject. But if you're not, or you have a question on that, please feel free to speak up. Yosh?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I completely understand that the balance it's inevitable in these projects, as mentioned by Chair Tom. But these changes, such decision is to be made, must have a clear rationale and sufficient to serve the public interest. This is not postponement at the level of national standard setters, but a decision by the level of international standard setter. And it might affect the credibility of the IAASB, so careful decision is needed, as I think, as a regulator. Thank you.
It's just to ask you, is this sense like I laid out a few principles up front about it. Is there a concern in specific about the comment periods on ER 600 that it may, like my view is, can you achieve ample stakeholder input so that we're guided to make a high quality decision to the public interest? I think that's what we're grappling with, or the impediments too great to that. I think what Lynn suggested on EER is that based upon our webinar and other feedback that we're receiving, is that there's nothing, and I use a double negative here potentially, nothing to suggest that we can't get it to this point. And so therefore it would be imprudent for us to extend the deadline further, considering the public interest on timeliness.
Yeah, I agree with your statement about the balancing of the public interest and high quality. So EER is not mandated in Japan. So as a regulator, we are not so big interested in the EER project. But other project is very influenced in Japanese audit regulation. So it's not easy to postpone easily. So please have a much more reasonable reason to postponement, to much more persuaded reason, I think. Thank you.
Okay, now I understand the weight of your comments. Okay, Fiona.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Lynn, for the explanation. Sounds like there's only a few people that have reached out to you. I think I've heard more comments in my firm than the 3 that have reached out to you, but none of them clearly brave enough to email you. I just think there is probably a greater probability, likelihood that comments may be late on EER. I know people should have started looking at it a lot sooner, but I think the volume of getting through that, through no fault of yours or the IAASB, now there's only a 7-day difference between your comment period on EER and the strategy for IFAC that came out the other day. It has a very short response period, 30 days or something. So I think people are going to be a little bit under pressure, and I'm just wondering whether or not it would make sense to even just put something on our website saying, please let us know if you're expecting you'll be late. I mean, every standard response period, there's always late people, but it would be good to know if any of your key stakeholders that you really want to hear from are going to be late. I just think that might help manage the risk of getting late comments, which are guaranteed to happen.
Lynn?
We're just going to put up on the website the slides and the recording of the webinar just to remind people. So it's not quite a don't forget, but it certainly is meant as a reminder to people to that it has to be there. I should have also mentioned that there are a number of stakeholders that are saying, please just get this out. So there is a public interest driver here, because whilst some countries don't do EER reporting, others do. And so there is certainly a desire by the practitioners, which I would say has been quite a sea change over the extent of the period, from lukewarmness to enthusiasm. So by no means everybody, of course, but certainly a reasonable majority are saying, let's get this out. So hopefully we can in a reasonable way. And obviously, if we don't get enough responses back on the 13th of July, we'll have to rethink. But you know, if we get 50, we'll be okay.
Okay, so with Lynn's explanation on ER, with the caveat that we'll be seeing how many we get back as well, I think the board, my sense of the room is that, or the Zoom room, I guess we call it, is that people are content with leaving the exposure comment period deadline the way it is for the time being. Okay, no objections to that. We turned quickly to 600. As said, we had already extended the comment period on 600 to October. And we have talked about this with our national standards setting partners and see what they've heard. And we met with IAASB Committee 1 and IFER, who all sort of supported the current position. I wouldn't say supported full, but we didn't hear objections and sort of urging the timely completion of that project, and understood the rationale. Obviously with the idea that things could change based upon the conditions on the ground, but that's what we've heard from our outreach so far, but I'd welcome any comments. Len.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I received a lot of positive comments in terms of the extended exposure period, and also give us more times to do outreach. There have been quite a lot of interest. Next week, I'm doing one with Roger and Renee and Sylvia in New Zealand and Australia, and there's a couple of other ones, and Josephine's had lined up Basel Banking Group for us. So I think people really appreciate the additional time to understand the risk-based approach, some of the key changes in the standards. So I've heard nothing but positive. So nothing negative has come across through my outreach and other task force members. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Len. Rich?
Thanks, Tom. So yeah, consultation, I've heard positive things that it was deferred. If for any other reason, just that we're listening and cognizant that you know, we're in difficult times and this will help people. The questions or comments I had, so consultation was fine. The effective date of 600, as Billy said, slipped. But he also said, you know, it is kind of strange for us to use June, and so that might change in the future. I just wonder from we don't look good when we keep pushing out our effective dates. So should we put out a June if we think it's actually going to move to December, or would we not look more making decisions of putting out the date that we think is the best chance of making it? Because if we leave it here and then I know we haven't had a debate or discussion on it, but you know, the staff are making a recommendation by putting this out I just think why confuse things then if we're going to potentially change it again. Last one is just more for ease of understanding and using the overall 3 pages. Is some places we use X's and some we don't. The X's are when we're going to have a discussion at the board. I find them very useful. I know our firm finds them useful to be able to look forward to see when topics are coming back. But you can see in several places, including ER 600, we have not used X's, but we know we're going to have meeting discussions, whether it's 600 in December, ER in December. But I think it's sporadically used. So I think it'd be helpful if we could fix that in the version that goes out after the meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Len raised his hand. Len, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, I think Rich made a good point about effective date. I think in the exposure draft we did go out with the specific questions on effective date. I think what Willie presented in the PowerPoint slide deck is a projection, but we really need to, as a task force, and to look at the comments received from exposure on the effective date and all the linkages to other standards before we can really conclude on what's the right effective date. And Rich being an important member of the task force, I look forward to Rich staying on until the end of December to continue looking at the effective day topic. Thanks.
Thank you. There's a lot of noise behind me right now for a second. So any other comments? Fiona?
I just wanted to check, are we talking about effective dates now, or was that a little bit later once we're done with the consultation period?
Yeah, I guess on the effective date, the question is if we go out to the public on the document, what we should show to it. But I very much, that's not a decided issue on 600 because it's an open topic and for the next discussion. I guess the question is on display of effective dates at 600. Do we need to show anything right now or not? Billy, any sense of your quick reaction to it?
Yeah, Tom, I completely understand the comments that were raised. We actually did think about it a few times, and we did have different versions on the slides. The reason why we put 18 months here is simply because the EM talks about 18 months. The big uncertainty, obviously, around ED 600 is we don't know what the comment letters are going to say. That's the big uncertainty in terms of the nature and substance of those comments, also around the implementation period. So I was thinking we can either do one of two things. Look, we're already going to update the slide for the error in terms of the ER section. We can either put in 2 rows there for 600. The one saying that in the EM it was 18 months, June 2023, and another one 24 months would mean December 2023. Or we can simply not, or we can take it out altogether and just stop after the comment period.
Rich and Fiona, in that order, any reactions?
Yeah, I was thinking once the discussion was going on, whether we just put an asterisk, leave it as it is, put an asterisk and says, depending on the feedback from the comment letters, this may go to a later date, or define the later date if you want to. At least that way people aren't fixated, and we never gave a hard and fast date, so we're not really changing it, which is my concern, that we just continue to change. But we're giving information here.
Okay. Fiona, reaction to Rich's suggestion?
Yeah, I think we just have to be, I don't mind what the solution is, but it's making it clear, because at the moment, if you've got the June date, even if you've got a second line or an asterisk or however you describe it, that there's a bit of a problem when you see everything laid out the way it's laid out at the moment. If you're going to have 315's got a December effective date, 220 has a December effective date. I understand why 600 has a June date, but it just seems a little bit inconsistent. You either need to have, I think 220 and 600 either need to have the same effective date, but then that's not going to work. It's not going to give you anywhere near enough time for 600, because you want to learn from the adoption of 220 before you then have to adopt 600. So then you probably need a year between them. And I think it's a much neater solution of, well, 1 year is 315, the next year is 220, the next year is 600, because you'll still have the overlay of the ISQM 1 and 2, which is a massive change as well. But for the auditors, because they're typically not going to be the ones crawling all over ISQM 1 and 2, but for the auditors having, you know, a clear outline of 1 year it's this year, 1 year it's this standard, then the next standard, and then the next standard, I think that would help. But at the moment, and this is already out because obviously our papers are public, people are reacting to the, seems odd that you've got a middle of the year effective date, which typically doesn't happen. And it makes it really difficult with allowing enough time for people to have adopted it, especially those jurisdictions who have December reporting periods and June reporting periods like we do. But I don't mind how you solve it, but I do think we just need to at least alert readers to the fact that for a whole range of reasons, it may change.
Okay, my solution to this is I hear no objection to the comment period as it was extended on 600. Leave it to the staff, and Fiona, you'll be part of it, and we can look at to see whether we've addressed it appropriately to provide transparency around the point. But we'll deal with the proposed effective date based upon what's in the exposure draft and the accompanying memorandum. Is that fine with everyone? Okay, no objections. I think we now need to move to Josephine.
Sorry, Tom. I guess I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting. Could you please repeat that for me, please?
So we're no change in the comment period for 600. I didn't hear any objections to the already extended comment period. There's been a question about clarification around what we mean by effective date on 600 based upon what the explanatory memorandum says and the outstanding comment period, and then its knock-on impacts. There've been a number of suggestions made around providing clarity to that point and avoiding confusion. I think we should take into account those suggestions and then see whether we could come up with a reasonable approach so we don't cause confusion in the marketplace. That we were just the table as it stands right now just reflects what the explanatory memorandum says and runs out, because we're not making any judgments. But obviously we're aware of the consequences of overlaying these standards, back-to-back effective dates, time involves that, and they all are subject to move with those considerations in mind. Does that make sense? So let us try to take it back to how to provide appropriate clarity and transparency and caution around what a literal interpretation of the effective date based upon the explanatory memorandum is. Obviously, these are all subject to board discussions once we get our feedback. So, okay, just reads not. Okay, I think we need to move quickly to the effective date of approved and issued standards, but not yet effective. AUP or a newly known ISRS 400. We're simplifying it. We're just cutting numbers off things right now to be sure. I haven't heard any objections to the proposed effective date. I don't know if anyone else has, but my sense is that based upon the standard of what we've heard is that it should remain unchanged. Any feelings to the contrary? Eric, you have anything to say on that topic?
We discussed that in Canada with some of our stakeholders, and they were comfortable with the effective date for AUP.
Okay. Anyone else hear anything different? Okay. 315, well, I've heard from time to time. that this is a topic we should discuss. I haven't heard a lot of noise around it. I think it's only fair for me to turn to Fiona as task force chair for this project to see if what she's heard in the marketplace and see what she thinks in terms of 315 effective dates.
I've heard it raised a couple of times, but again, probably no one brave enough to raise it formally directly with me. I do worry that would mean if we delayed it, that 220, 315, ISQM1, ISQM2, they would all have the same effective date, which would be a total overload. And I think if you had to delay 315, which again, I haven't heard lots of feedback, then you'd need to do it by 2 years and try and match it up with 600 perhaps. But I haven't heard a lot of comments. Even informally, it's only been a couple around deferring it or delaying 315. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, and that goes, I think I'm reminded a couple of points there is to understand the unintended consequences of any delay. And to Yosh's point about the public interest, what happens, like what's if we do delay and standards then get all backed up or knocked on to later points, partly because of the unintended consequences. Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Actually, you touched on what I was just going to say is I think it's actually more important if we really believe that 315, will enhance audit quality in the environment that we're currently in. Enhancing risk assessment, I think, is one of the top of mind things that comes to everybody's mind. And I actually think, I would never venture to say things are becoming normal, but I think, people are adapting to the environment in which we're in and how to get things done. And with the effective date being out there, as it has been for some time, I totally support it. I think it's actually in the public interest to move forward with 315 from an enhancing audit quality perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Rich?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the same. I think we do need to be conscious of what's out there and the troubles everyone's having. But I think that balance is what the public interest has of getting standards out. 315 has been out there. And we need to me, having it separating 315 separate than the quality standards is important, so they're not having everything at the same time. While I could see the argument, and people in my firm have raised the argument of is there a way to move 315 later? It then just gets jumbled up with the other standards, and so there has to be some give and take. And to me, doing 315 as expected would give you that give and take, especially with 600 going later.
Thank you, Rich. Jim? Maybe on mute still, Jim.
Thanks, Tom. I just want to reflect in the CAG meetings, there wasn't any issues with respect to 315 and the timing. There were some issues with respect to the QM standards, which I assume we're going to discuss, but nothing came up at the CAG relative to 315 and timing.
Yeah, QM standards is actually a specific topic of conversation in this board meeting. It will defer any discussion on QM unless it has knock-on effects of other work plan items. So thank you. I see no other hands up. I think my sense from this is that we leave ISA 315 effective date as is, but I think we've had the opportunity and considered why we believe that's the case. Very concerned about the knock-on consequences of any delay, cognizant of what we've heard, and the public interest requiring this important standard. Fiona?
Yeah, I was just going to make one further comment. We did receive quite a few comments as we were finalising 315 as well, saying that there were a number of jurisdictions that were delaying 540 effective date locally because they wanted to pair it up with 315. So that would be another unintended consequences for certain jurisdictions. If we delayed 315, that would likely delay their adoption of 540 as well, which I'm sure Rich would never be in favour of either. So that's just another reason where it doesn't make sense. Thanks, Tom.
Great. So we're aligned on this point. So I think we've addressed the issue of comment periods. We've addressed the issue of effective date of outstanding standards. We've talked a little bit about effective dates of 600. On all the QM standards, we have a very dedicated session on that topic, and we'll take it up. So really, it comes to, if you got to the final slide of this deck, right? Armand? If there are other comments about our work plan response or timings of our approach that board members have. Eric.
Thanks, Tom. And maybe I missed this or not been following along properly, but the auditor reporting PIR that's supposed to come back in December. I mean, I haven't seen or heard anything around the work that's being done to gather the information. And I know in Canada, we haven't started working that. So I'm just trying to understand what's the status of that review and how do we participate in it?
We'll gather points to be efficient. Josephine?
Thanks, Tom. Just on that, thanks to Bev for pointing out that they will look at auditor reporting activity in respect of COVID-19, because I think this is obviously an excellent time to draw on some examples. And the other thing I want to say is I'm just slightly worried about the staff alerts point and having only that one block there. I recognise that that's just anticipating what's coming down the track, what's going to be completed in the next few weeks or so. But this idea of targeted issues or urgent issues, we could see more of these coming along. We've already talked about a couple on this board call today, sorry, Zoom call today. And I wonder if we really ought to be more transparent in recognising that that will take up time, board's time, and particularly staff time. So to me, I think it would be better to recognise perhaps a couple more blocks in there. They don't have to be, all the way through to the end of 2020, but maybe another in Q4 where we look again and see if there's something that's urgent or targeted that we could do. And that was it. Thank you, Tom.
Imran?
Chairman, good afternoon. This is the first time I'm taking the floor. Let me say hello and wish you all the best for the week ahead. I also want to say hello to the millions of supporters on YouTube. One of the 17 is my wife, who says this is very impressive, but she's disappointed to hear that she won't be going to New York. So I have just a few comments to make and then perhaps two questions. One is, Tom, I really appreciate how you've described our board's response from the perspective of assist, adapt, and coordinate. I appreciate that those are words, but those words have been borne out by the actions that you have led over the last quarter. And I think it's particularly underlined by the two comments you made in the opening of the session this afternoon. That's speaking to the global crisis that we're still facing in respect of COVID, and the other one, this changed landscape that we're dealing with around dealing with questions of inclusivity and equity. I've learned something from the way the board has responded on the subject of COVID in the last 90 days, and that is that our board is able to be far more agile than we've given ourselves credit for in the years gone by. And the fact that through the resources, I appreciate it's been a lot of work. Bev has led so much of this, but been able to draw in, particularly Fiona on one project, Josephine on another, the idea that we need 3 years to do some things. Bev has just proven to us that actually our stakeholders have watched and learned and said, well, the IAASB can do a couple of things in 60 days or 90 days. And it really is a good tempo or cadence for other responses that we may be asked to do in the future. So I'm not looking for responses, but really just a positive observation. The two matters on which I have questions, and two topics that haven't yet come up in the context of the COVID discussion. One is in respect of the ethics board. Are there any touch points in the calendar and the plan that you put forward, Willie, that would have an impact on us in respect of how they are moving and responding to COVID matters, recognizing how much of time and effort we've placed in the subject of coordination between our two boards? There's barely a project without an ethics touch point, and what some thoughts are around that. And secondly, Tom, as we've focused a great deal on our calendar and its impact on our projects, I'd be grateful to understand how the resource envelope of the IAASB has or has not changed in light of what are global funding challenges. Are we saying, and I appreciate that maybe what is implied by being silent on it, that there is no planned change in the resource envelope assigned to our board, meaning staff resources and potentially resources for task meetings and other things, and therefore actually our work program is not influenced by financial resources, they're influenced by other things. Because certainly in many of the places where we all work, our financial resources are top of the pile of risks we face in relation to the delivery of our work programs, along with the other things that you described. But if your message is a positive one, then there's been no change in the IFAC funding situation, then that'd be a great message to take away from this session. Thank you very much, Tom, and congratulations on a great start for the week.
Thanks, Imran. Okay. Well, title Imran's question about resources last. Maybe I'll turn it over to Billy to respond to a couple of the points that we just heard regarding like IAASB coordination and Josephine's point about allocating more, at least visually, resources to continued COVID response, which will probably be with us for at least another 18 months, I would imagine. Billy?
Thank you, Tom. Let me maybe start with that one first. I think certainly we are going to do a few updates to these slides based on the discussion today. And I think Josephine's point is well taken, that our work effort will probably continue beyond Q2. So we can certainly just indicate that in the detailed work plan. Then on the question around the auditor reporting implementation review, you will remember that earlier I made the point that we had to adjust very quickly when the lockdown started in March, and one of the casualties was actually that there was going to be an auditor reporting implementation update during the March board meeting. That was that obviously in the end didn't happen. I can assure you that the auditor reporting implementation working group has met in quarter two. We have progressed the work plan. Dan is leading that project. Actually, later in this week, Kalina and I have a meeting where we're going to look at the final survey that's going to go out. So it's very much still according to plan. That's why you also saw that in the work schedule, we haven't changed any of the targeted dates there. But I completely get Eric's point in terms of, well, we might be doing a lot of things, but people out there don't know we're doing them. So I think once we finalize the survey, that will be our main source of collecting information that we will do together with IFAC as well. We will be coordinating with IFAC as well in terms of getting a wide distribution of that survey. So that will go out, and then we also have a series of targeted outreach activities to target groups that we would not normally hear from, that would not normally respond to a survey that we send out, like investor groups, those charged with governance, those type of things. So those things are progressing, but I take the note that the time is it's probably a good time to also maybe be a little bit more public about what's coming up. So we will certainly take that forward. Then on the point around the ethics board, as always, we've actually had we've had one coordination call in Q2 involving Kai Mortenhagen and Lisbeth on the ethics side that deals with the coordination liaison. But apart from that, our coordination is very, very active on the individual projects. The two staff teams meet very regularly. Specifically on COVID-19, IAASB has issued their first Q&A, and I'm also aware that they've set up a similar engagement with national standard setters. So Ken and I will continue to be in contact. At the moment, our contact points are very much related to the project work that is being done. We stay very close to those. I can quickly give you a summary that the big items from an ethics side that impacts on the IAASB, obviously there's a lot from our side that impacts on them, but let me stick to the other one, to the former first, is the project on non-assurance services and fees. That consultation closed on June 4. They are in the process of processing those comment letters. We will obviously keep on coordinating with them as we did before the ED went out. And in actual fact, we've already identified one additional point that we need to add to the coordination list for that project. On the PI project, you will remember the definition of listed entities and public interest entities. We've got 2 correspondent members that attend those task forces in Josephine and Fiona. They're moving forward, and this is a project that we fully realize we need to bring to the board, and that's why we've targeted the call for July 22nd to have an at least 2-hour discussion on PI with our board. And then we've already, you haven't seen it yet, but in that draft agenda for the September meeting that we will finalize soon after this week's meeting, we have reserved another session on the PI project. We do realize, however, because of the work plan of both boards, as well as the constraints that brings us in terms of the virtual time that is available, we will probably not have our traditional September joint session as we've had in the past, but we will look at maybe accommodating, if there's a need for it, a separate call maybe in Q4. But I want to qualify it if there's really a need for it, because we are also conscious in terms of all these adjustments that we've made, that we can't make all these adjustments and then schedule a number of additional calls, because that will sort of defeat the purpose. But Ken and I will stay in contact on that. And then on the group engagement team, group audits independence project, also a close coordination with the ISA 220 and ISA 600 task forces on that one. Following the IAASB board meeting last week, 1 or 2 issues have been flagged to us, and we actually have a meeting with the IAASB team this week to just touch base with them on those topics. So as you can see, and on the other project, Imran will talk to that during the session on Friday. So I just want to create a sense that the coordination is really very active, and especially at the level where it needs to be, and that's where the projects are being executed. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Billy. Imran, the one last question about resources. We take nothing for granted, but we've also been blessed that we believe our resources for this year are fully intact. One of the unintended consequences, I'm not going to call it a benefit, but obviously we're generating as a organization significant savings from lack of travel right now. And we're trying to be prudent about the use of resources. The number one thing in my mind is preserving staff resources and our staff capacity. And I think I feel it, you know, I could invite James if he'd like to comment on it, but I feel reasonably confident that we should be able to do something in that regard, and that we'll be able, we have a stable position. I take nothing for granted though in this environment. We're totally conscious. I think it just means that we should be very prudent in the way we utilize our resources, but preserve staff and our related resources in an appropriate way. But no warning lights to me so far. Hi, James.
Thank you. I'll just quickly add, and I think Imran is right. I think every stakeholder in the world, whether it's the firms, member bodies, government agencies, they're all experiencing a financial consequence of COVID. I think as Tom has suggested, we have a privilege of working within an envelope that's broader than our own. And that provides much stability. On the other hand, we have to be conscious that IFAC as a principal funder will be experiencing some financial challenges naturally as a result of membership and member dues and the implications of COVID. I think sufficient to say is it's too early to tell at the moment what those are. So we are monitoring those, but I think our main goal is to make sure, and maybe I can provide assurance, there's no curtailment in our staffing resources or our use of our consultants, and that's principally that's very valuable. Our programming, I think our budget is a continuation of our current budget pre-COVID, in the sense. But we are, and we should be looking very, very ambitiously at how do we manage our travel and our cost savings, because that is a discretionary area. And I reflect that we do have a new competency, I guess, in the sense that we are all a little bit better now virtually. So I think as we move forward, we should be very rigorous and very cost conscious around how do we operationalize our workflow. And to me, I think, the opportunity for using virtual means and reducing the burden on members. And there is a considerable travel burden under normal circumstances. So as we look into 2021, I think we are going to be very open to understanding how we can find and manage our costs using technology. And I think that's going to be the norm for every organization around the world.
Okay, thank you, James. I see no other comments. This has been a very useful discussion about our response to COVID-specific events. Obviously, it will permeate almost everything we do on a go-forward basis. Before we break, I just asked Karen and Jim if you have anything you want to add. There's no requirement to, but I wanted to just pause if you did want to say anything from either the CAG or public interest perspective. Okay, great.
Any additional comments?
I'm sorry?
I do not have any additional comments.
Okay, thank you all. Again, I thought this was an excellent conversation. I think we do need a pause for a second to give people a chance to break, either refresh their cup of coffee or take a break. We'll come back. It's 9:03 a.m. on the East Coast of the States. I say we come back at 9:15 my time, and then we'll finish with technology today. So thank you. I'll see you in about 12 minutes. Okay, we're going to try to start shortly. We have another 30 seconds before we get going. We do need Bob Dorr to return to the video, though, for this one. And here he is, not like clockwork. Okay, I suggest that we begin, but before we begin, I've learned that there's a birthday boy in the midst. So happy birthday to Jamie Shannon. Jamie, I hope you're enjoying potentially one of your more interesting birthdays of your life in the period of COVID, but hopefully you'll get some ability to celebrate today. So happy birthday, Jamie. Bob, I think we're ready for technology.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom, and welcome everyone. The remainder of the time that we have today will be spent on the technology, specifically as it relates to the work being undertaken by the Technology Working Group. Be referring to agenda item 3, which is our discussion paper, and also using the slides that you'll be seeing on the screen today. As any good working group chair has learned, first and most important thing is to acknowledge the members of the working group who have been doing some brilliant work, as well as staff that really have pitched in here and worked through some issues that we'll talk about today. So in addition to myself, our technology working group comprises Sue Almond, Melissa Bonsall, Peter Eimers, Joanna Field, Josephine Jackson, Fernando, and we also have a IAASB liaison, Greg Driscoll, who joins our regular monthly calls also. Since we last talked, which I'll come on to in a minute, which was about a year ago, we've had some change in the staff. Phil was working with the working group for about half the time, maybe a little bit more, and really was integral in the working group being able to publish some of the material that we have to date. And then more recently, Yvonne has joined us, and of course, Brett being involved at a kind of an oversight level or coordination level. I have to say it's been extremely comforting and pleasing to me as a working group chair to have Yvonne come on, because technology is one of the things that she really takes to, has some experience with, and has been really useful to us in bringing some practical experience also to the group. So as I mentioned briefly, the last time that we had a formal technology working group update really goes back to our meeting a year ago, June 2019. And if you recall, at that meeting, the Audit Evidence Working Group, and of course we'll have a separate discussion on that on Thursday, but working with the Technology Working Group, had developed a rather robust and comprehensive list of issues that had been identified with respect to, of course, with the Technology Working Group, specifically with respect to technology, after taking a trip or a pass through the IAASB as they stood today. And the board had some very good discussion in June of 2019. Really, the outcome of that was that the board noted that some of the issues that had been identified really indicated that there was a more pressing need to develop support material on the implications of technology when applying certain aspects of those ISAs. And we went through the list then of issues that had been identified and allocated those between the technology working group and the audit evidence working group. And of course, you'll see the other bucket of issues on Thursday that the audit evidence working group has been dealing with. But coming out of that June board meeting, as I said, we developed this initial plan or group of topics that we would be addressing and publishing non-authoritative support material from the technology working group perspective. That list comprised 8 primary buckets of different types of non-authoritative material. The steering committee approved, now the planning committee approved that plan in August last year. And then in September of last year, although it really wasn't discussed during plenary session, the board was provided with the technology working group work stream plan as we have it today, and that was in the September meeting. Of course, that work stream plan is available on the IAASB website. So really, the purpose of what we have time with you for today is to first of all provide you some update on those 8 different topics and where we are at with some of those topics and update the board on that. And then secondly, as we move kind of to the second objective, will be to discuss some of the kind of hurdles or obstacles that the working group has encountered in being able to write and publish some of the material to date, and then discuss some possible or request some direction from the board or approval from the board with what the working group views as a way forward to soften or alleviate some of those hurdles and aid in more meaningful non-authoritative support materials being published. So what you see on your screen here is the first 4 topics that the working group had agreed to take on. These are in chronological order. If you look at our work stream plan, you would note that we are behind where we were intended to be. But as I mentioned earlier, some of that is to attributable to some of the difficulties we've encountered, as well as a little bit of the due process going back and forth with the board and what we've been able to work through there. But essentially, the first project the working group took on was to issue or write draft FAQs on the use of automated tools and techniques when performing procedures in conjunction with ISA 315 revised. Essentially, the working group ourselves have completed those FAQs and they are near finalization. I think Bev provided an update just recently that indicated they'll likely be coming to the board in the very near term, the next week or two, to have a go at them and provide any fatal flaw comments and things like that coming back. But that's just a timing matter with respect to releasing the materials around ISA 315. As well as not burdening the board with preparation for our meeting this week. So you can be looking to see those in fairly short order following this week's board meeting. The second topic was an FAQ or series of FAQs actually we did on audit documentation. How does audit documentation relate to use of automated tools and technologies? That document was published. You'll recall the board received that for a no objection to publish process earlier this year. I'll come back. I'll talk about some of the difficulties we encountered with that in conjunction with the second objective today. And then, really just working our way through. That was really the first process we went through with providing the board with the draft document and getting comments back and working through those to address and things like that. I'd say lesson perhaps learned at that point with respect to our timeline is that, you know, although it is not a plenary discussion that we have or a formal board vote, it still takes time to work through offline comments, make changes, clear those, get the working group together and things like that. So while we were probably a little bit over optimistic and aggressive in thinking that we could be publishing papers on you know, one topic at a time, a month apart, we've realized that perhaps that's not realistic given the process that we certainly think we need to employ to share the drafts with the board to get those comments and work through from a fatal flaw perspective. So, but the FAQ on documentation is out. We are currently near finalization, at least from the working group perspective, and so it'll be coming to the board in the near term on a topic that has two separate elements to it in the way of non-authoritative support material. The first one is addressing the question of whether automated tools and techniques can be utilized to perform both risk assessment and substantive audit procedures concurrently. The second topic that we're addressing there is whether there are any unique aspects of utilization of automated tools and technologies as it relates to ISA 520 on substantive analytics. As I said, those publication or that publication is near finalization, so you should be looking for that also coming in the near term. We've provided, especially with the first aspect on concurrent or using AT&T and concurrently to accomplish both risk assessment and substantive procedures, we've included a rather robust illustration to help with that. So we're certainly looking forward to getting feedback from the board as it relates to that issue. We've also commenced outreach, at least at the staff level, and research on the next element of our work plan, which is really dealing with over-reliance or the risk of audit or over-reliance when using technology and the need for professional judgment. So we are in the midst of that work stream currently. And then as we move to the next slide, Armand, you will see the final four buckets of our topics that were approved in our Audit Evidence Working Group or work stream plan. You will note that the timelines, if you did some comparisons to what we've published on the website for the timeline with these topics have changed. As I mentioned earlier, I think we've learned some lessons about the time involved with working back and forth with the board and things of that nature. But we do still plan to address new technologies and information sources as it relates to fraud and going concern. We look to get those out in Q4 of this year. I guess the points I would make about those two projects is we have been coordinating with staff. Had a call with Bev and Angela and Yvonne and I last week or the week before, I forget. But we are, of course, aware that the board itself has kind of a separate work or on the project agenda now to address fraud and going concern, I think more holistically, and that's the result of some outreach that had been done. So with respect to the technology working group, we have focused these two pieces of non-authoritative support material more on how it would relate to extant ISA 240 and 570 on going concern. And the longer term, more pervasive impacts of technology, because we think they are in play, but that would be coordinated with whatever working groups and project plans come out on potential revisions to those standards longer term. So the technology working group would be just looking at the extant standards as they exist today. We also then have a project on the implications of use of technology on determining materiality, performance materiality, so on and so forth. You can see we've revised that to Q4 of 2020. And then we had a bucket of what we've called other combined guidance. That's the 8th category. It's really kind of a hodgepodge of some topics that are viewed as being lower priority that could perhaps be combined in kind of an omnibus, non-authoritative type of publication. It deals with the technology impact on engagement letters, terms of engagement, related parties, key audit matters, so on and so forth, use of experts. And we now have pushed that back into the Q1 of 2021. So I think, Tom, maybe it's appropriate at this point just to pause. I realize this is mostly an update, status update, but happy to entertain any questions on the work stream plan and where we're at currently.
In general, or do you want to talk about the paper itself, the cover note sort of suggests?
Okay, sure, I can continue.
Yeah, I think that's just considering the time we have left in the call.
Perfect, because they actually tie in pretty well together. So I mentioned the second objective today is to discuss an issue that the working group has encountered and really, at least contributed to some delays along the line. And that has to do with some of the directives that the working group believes were received when we commenced the work stream plan around resisting or not writing material that would indicate in any way that the use of technology resulted or could result in more effective audits, higher quality audits, not to create an impression that using manual procedures was not as effective or not as efficient or ineffective or inefficient. And we have been working to date within those confines. What we have experienced though is that, and I'll avoiding some of those types of explanations, comparing and contrasting use of technology versus manual procedures, is actually can be a little bit misleading, perhaps, or not as robust in bringing forth points that need to be made. Because there are, I think reality indicates that there are just certain circumstances under which the use of technology may be better, may provide better evidence. It's just different. And at the same time, there are circumstances in which the use of manual procedures may be preferred or very appropriate. What we have agreed is that we have not identified any circumstances really where the use of manual procedures could not or would not result in effective audit procedures in a quality audit. But we have encountered places where it's just been difficult to describe fully the implications and some of the benefits of the use of technology in certain circumstances without discussing the differences in the quality of the audit evidence produced itself. So the best illustration I guess I can give for this is, and I'll take you back to our audit documentation publication that we issued. The working group largely set off on a mission with that paper to discuss the differences in application primarily of ISA 230 as it relates to whether you were using automated tools and techniques or whether you were using manual procedures. Now, fundamentally, as we looked at those questions, the answer, if you just look at the standards, is clearly the ISO 230 was written in an era where technology was not being used as extensively as it is today. So at a very high level, the conclusion that the working group reached was that the application of ISO 230 applied equally, both to whether you were using automated tools and techniques or whether you were using manual procedures. For example, you're required to document the procedures performed, the results, the results of those procedures, conclusions reached, so on and so forth. And you need to do that, whether, notwithstanding the type of procedure, manual or automated, that's being used. However, as we were writing the paper, we did, for example, mention that in certain circumstances, using automated tools and techniques may result in more documentation be required, simply because more items were identified for follow-up or resolution and things like that. And the issue that we struggled with was that actually could be perceived by some as being dissuasion or dissuading auditors from use of automated tools and techniques, because all we could really say was that the application of ISO 230 would result in more extensive documentation. And what we felt limited with was being able to explain that, well, the reason there was more extensive documentation was actually because the automated tool and technique had been applied at a disaggregation level that went all the way down to transactions, and therefore was likely more effective with very large populations. And as a result, from a cost benefit, yes, there may be more documentation required, but it was simply because the use of the automated tool and technique may have been more effective in that particular circumstance. So we have struggled with that to date. You will see in agenda item 3, we've laid that out. We certainly believe that the ISAs intend for the auditor to use professional judgment to the greatest extent possible in determining the nature of procedures to be used, whether automated or manual. And you can see then, Armand, if we can just go back one slide, where we have gotten to is that we would like to get the board's feedback on whether the working group can, in limited circumstances, discuss or compare and contrast the effectiveness of using technology versus manual procedures, especially identifying the circumstances under which one may be more preferable to the other. And as such, in the discussion paper, as well as on the screen here, we have proposed using an information box at the beginning of each of our non-authoritative publications that simply lays out, as you can see here, that there are, in certain circumstances, so on and so forth. For example, in order to mitigate sampling risk when automated tools and techniques are applied to every item in a population. Or there's other situations where using manual procedures may be more appropriate if it's a very small population comprised of hard copy documents or something like that. Just set the context and allow the working group a little bit more flexibility in being able to describe why some of these differences exist, just as a practical matter when applying the ISAs.
So we're ready to, I'm just conscious of time here. You ready to turn to the 2 questions to the board?
Yes,
now?
certainly.
Yeah. Okay, great. You laid that all out comprehensively. So on the 2 questions for the board, Fiona.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Bob, for the update. I have some real issues with this. For me, it's not about the efficiency of a technique, for example. That's up to the auditor to determine. That shouldn't be something that we have a view on. And I feel uncomfortable with encouraging or suggesting there's a preference for one technique over the other. But what I feel the most uncomfortable about is well, I was going to say the inference, but you've actually said it in a number of places, that you get better quality audit evidence if you're using, for example, an automated tool and technique. I actually don't think it's about better or worse audit evidence. I actually think it's about, and some of the examples you mentioned draw that out. When you're looking at an entire population of data and an entire volume of transactions, then there's a greater chance of effectively identifying those transactions that might have risk characteristics or a greater risk of material misstatements compared to maybe traditional sampling approaches where you're selecting a smaller sample and you're not looking at the entire population necessarily. So yes, it does reduce sampling risk. I think the conclusions that you're forming when you're using testing techniques over a full population of data, assuming you're doing it properly and you're following up any of the exceptions that you identify, then presumably you would have those conclusions are being based on techniques where you've had a greater chance of identifying those errors that could be wrong. In terms of your suggested wording, there's a few typos which I can provide to you, but I really feel uncomfortable with inferring or even explicitly stating that there's better audit evidence. I think it's a pretty slippery slope before we'll start talking about almost like two different types of audits, one that's used automated tools and techniques and therefore better audit quality evidence has been identified or better audit evidence has been obtained. I think what people really want to know is it okay to use these techniques, automated tools and techniques? So if we're going to have a disclaimer on the things that we put out there from the technology working group, then at a minimum, I'd like that to be added as well, that actually it's okay. Think about what automated tools and techniques might be available to still meet the requirements of the ISAs, but it is okay to use automated tools and techniques, because I think that's one of the questions we get asked a lot, is because they're not explicitly talked about in many standards, is it okay? So that's my feedback. I feel very uncomfortable though with this concept of better quality audit evidence when you're using automated tools and techniques. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks. Kayua?
Thanks, Tom, and hello, everyone from Germany. Thanks, Bob, for your presentation and the work of your group. In total, I support the way you have proposed here. I have two comments very similar to Fiona. I'm also concerned about the loose use of the term better quality audit evidence in this paper. The quality of audit evidence relates, in my view, to its appropriateness, not its sufficiency. When the use of ATT mitigates sampling risk in a large population because every item can be tested, then this is more audit evidence. That is a great extent of audit evidence, not better quality audit evidence, because this is akin to a manual procedure being expanded to more items in the population. The term better quality audit evidence ought to be limited to those circumstances in which the use of ATT leads to the acquisition of a kind of audit evidence that is more appropriate and that cannot normally be obtained by means of manual procedures. That's my first comment. Then I have a comment which refers to paragraph 6 in the paper. There needs to be some recognition that the efficiency of using ATT means that some kinds of audit procedure using ATT becomes practicable, whereas the less efficient manual procedures may not be practicable due to their being less efficient Furthermore, as ISA 200 paragraph A50 recognize audits needs to be performed with a reasonable time at reasonable cost. Consequently, efficiency is an important matter. Then I have a last comment, Bob. This refers to the box in the paper again, where the term better audit quality is mentioned. I would replace it in the box with more and more evidence. So these are my comments, and or comments refer to both questions which are mentioned in the box with the question to the IAASB. Thanks.
Thanks. Sachika?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you very much, Bob, for your overall presentation, including what is going on right now. It's very helpful for me. First of all, I support the approach proposed by the working group. I think sometimes it will be necessary and appropriate to compare the use of ATT as opposed to manual procedure with regard in this type of document, if it's used in the appropriate context. So I think I support the proposal. With regard to the proposed text to be included, I have one comment on the second paragraph. The first sentence of the second paragraph states that use of ATT may result in better quality audit evidence relative to the assertion being tested. And the second sentence provides an example of the use of ATT in performing procedures over every item. And if the point is, better audit quality relative to the assertion being tested, I want the use of ATT that provide more relevant audit evidence would be even better example, such as selecting samples that attribute specific characteristics and analyzing the result by using ATT. But other than that, I don't have a specific comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sachika. Julie?
Thanks, Tom, and hello, everyone. Thanks, Bob. My comments are pretty similar to Fiona's. I'm not opposed to some sort of box at the top of the guidance or the papers that we put out, but I did really trip over the term better quality audit evidence. And so I started to think about what the task force was getting at is that the use of ATT may enhance the audit in a number of areas. So I stopped to think about what those might be. There could be some areas where you're getting better or a higher quality of audit evidence, but I don't think the focus should be there. I think it's about being better informed. Your risk assessment is better informed because you have the ability to view large data sets that wouldn't be available to you manually, or your responses to risk could be more pinpointed with the ability to have that information. You mentioned the sampling risk one, that comes to mind. Looking at different attributes in the data because you have that available to you that you wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. You might come across contradictory information or more confirming information as a result of that, and potentially have more insights and valuable conversations with those charged with governance or others. So I think all those areas enhance the audit potentially and add to the audit overall, but I really had a hard time with saying better quality audit evidence because I think that infers that manual, evidence derived from manual procedures is inferior, and I don't think that's what we want to say in our guidance. So I had a few other small items on the text box, but I can send those to you offline.
Thanks, Julie. Rich?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I guess similar to many others, the term audit quality was problematic for me and the people I reached out to. It does pose an interesting observation to me that it does seem since 315 and 540 moved on, I am agreeing a lot more with Fiona, which I hope is a good thing. But very many of the things that she and even just Julie just said about it's not really quote unquote audit quality, but maybe it's so we get more volume of evidence or more persuasive evidence. Dare I say maybe more effective, but I know we don't want to use efficient, but I do think we need to find a better word. It does come throughout the paper and specifically on the header. And again, like Julia, I think having a header is fine. Also, I could see if we're very careful that we could use a compare and contrast type language, but we'd have to be careful, again, not to say that manual is inferior in some way. But if we're just saying you might be enhanced or effective in going a certain about one way because you get more of the attributes covered. I do believe in this. I do believe that we should be putting more of this into or out there so that people can understand why and how AT&T can help. The other point was just, while we're focusing on the non-authoritative guidance here, I do think we need to continually stress the fact that this ties into the evidence project, and in that case, that would presumably be more authoritative guidance. So, I do think these need to be brought together and continually monitored together. So, thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Isabel? Yes,
thank you. To question one, like many others, Fiona, Rick, Kayuva, I'm uncomfortable with the way we explain audit evidence is better quality. And the way we explain it in the example is strange because to make it short, we say it's better quality because it's higher quantity. And I'm not sure it's the right message that we can convey. On question 2 and the wording in the square, I have a very strong issue with the second sentence of the square, which has not been reported to the slide that we have seen. But for me, it's just part of the story. So this sentence says that regardless of the tools and technique, the auditor is required to comply with each requirement of a relevant ISA. And when you go to ISA 200, where this sentence comes from, it's not as simple as that. Paragraph 22 of ISA 200 says that subject to paragraph 23, the auditor has to comply with each requirement unless, and the first unless is unless the entire ISA is not relevant, and second unless is the requirement is conditional and there's no condition. So that's the first layer. And then paragraph 23 is the exceptional circumstance. You may depart from a requirement when you can do it in another way. So for me, paragraph 22 and paragraph 23 of ISA 200 are key. And if we just say in a square, the auditor is required to comply with each requirement of a relevant ISA, it's a too short summary, and it does not provide the whole picture on what is an auditor supposed to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabel. Kai Morton,
thank you. I'll keep this short, not to repeat all the comments that have come through. I also have issues with the better quality audit evidence. I do think that this is an important area, and I do think it's a good approach to start to give some non-authoritative support, because the practitioners need help on identifying and getting support for where they can use the ATT. So I think that's really important, and that we might highlight by doing this. Thanks.
Thank you. Len?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I don't want to repeat the comments on the better audit evidence comments. I think those are really articulated. But I do have a comments about the last sentence about the manual one. I think we need a better example, because right now it says if there's nothing, it's only available in hard copies, then you do it manually. But it doesn't really address, the quality issues. And maybe certain manual procedures are still more effective than ATT, but that example doesn't really surface that, the difference between ATT and manual procedure. So just want to ask, perhaps we should look at a better example for the manual procedure. Thank you.
It's funny on that topic. I almost think the specificity of that example it causes to hiccup when we were reviewing that paper. We always think that it'd be better without even singling out a specific example. Roger.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Look, similar. I understand and I support the approach of trying to get some words up the front and get some generic words up the front. Concerns around better quality, and if you are going to get generic words, I would take out examples to try and get the words. I didn't have words, but I do think the enhance makes a lot of sense to me. So that's something that you may wish to pursue, and I understand the words around sufficient and appropriate. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. That seems like all the hands. Like I'm reminded, it's clear that there's unease about making normative judgments about what's better or worse. And I just always remind myself from when I started rolling technology that it's a tool in your toolkit meant to solve particular problems. There's times that it helps, and it really helps the auditor to do what he or she needs to do, and that should be reflective. And I think that's sort of the spirit by which the words are being meant, and it should be noted as such. But we should be very careful to say that it's necessarily better unless we believe it can't be done in other ways. Because I think we had this discussion in a previous discussion about efficiency not being our goal. It's quality is the outcome that we're seeking in pretty much all circumstances. So I think, Bob, you've heard very consistent comments, like support for your group moving ahead, but some thoughtful input as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and thanks everyone for the feedback. Certainly won't run through because it was very consistent. So concerned about better quality, absolutely. So I heard several things about more or enhanced or persuasiveness or something of that nature. Working group will take this back to see what we can do. When you get to things like more, it of course begs the question of, well, why would you do more if it wasn't better? So it's kind of that question, but perhaps reflecting back a little bit, I think on Fiona's one of her initial comments was maybe just taking a view of trying to explain that it's okay to use automated tools and techniques to accomplish these things, and then maybe just go from there on, highlighting some of the differences without indicating circumstances where one would be preferable over the other. So we'll take that away and see what we can do with it, Tom.
I think it seems to me that we have guidance coming out, and that we need to move to some extent, like with some speed on this. Is the idea maybe that the working group would react to this and share with the board offline its response in some relatively short timetable? Or do you need to reflect on it?
Well, yes,
I think the sense that I don't want us to always be constrained by board time on this important topic.
Yeah, I think absolutely, Tom. We've got, as I mentioned early on, we've got a couple of papers that are coming out, should be coming to the board in short order here. And for example, so that box will be a feature to that. The working group will take the input, rework that, and can provide, where the working group got to that back to the board. offline, so we don't need to wait for another meeting. We'll incorporate that with some of the documents coming forward.
Okay. Anyone else wants to comment on this topic? I don't know whether we should applaud ourselves. I see my clock going to 9:59 a.m. right now, which means that we're completed today's business. Vili, Bev, Brett, anything else that we need to raise? We ended on time. I will see you tomorrow. And we have this crucial topic of LCEs. I could say that we're going to stay on the call as long as it takes tomorrow to reach a firm conclusion. But I won't say that. I'll just sort of suggest it. But I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. For those that are near bedtime, sleep well. Great discussions this morning. A really good start to the week. Thank you for everyone who's observing on our YouTube channel, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.